Well, great. So Wes, we'll kick it off. So can you hear me okay, Wes?
I can, yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks again for joining, and maybe just to kick it off for the audience who may not be completely familiar with MedFirst, maybe give us a little bit about the company and your background, and we can take it from there.
Sure. So, and appreciate the invitation, and happy to be with everybody that's here also. Um, yeah, so a little bit about MedFirst. So MedFirst is a collection of family practice and urgent care clinics in North and South Carolina. Um, as was mentioned previously, it is a private equity-backed venture. So Spherica Capital Partners got into the asset back in 2016. I joined in October of 2018. And at the time, we had about 25 centers. And it's kind of an interesting time with the business in that we had just lost our CFO. And so they asked me to come in and see what I could do with the business. We have a great CEO and a great staff. And the business just needed a little bit of TLC. So that's about the time that I joined in, but it's a great business. We have about, 80 providers. If you're in the space, we use mid-levels or extenders, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, make up the bulk of our practitioners, although we do have 5 medical doctors on staff. A really neat business in what we call secondary markets. So, while we do have locations in Raleigh, we also have locations in Roxborough, North Carolina, and in Richlands, North Carolina, and in Dillon, South Carolina, and some markets where access to healthcare has been an issue. And so we're proud of our communities. We're proud where we are, where we are located, and we think that we serve, in the primary care space, we think that we serve a vital piece of the healthcare puzzle for our patients that, again, don't have vast clinics and infrastructures and hospital systems and the things that large cities afford. They look to their primary care clinic for a lot of things, and so we're happy to serve that in the markets that we're in.
That's great. Really, really helpful. If you think back, Wes, to day one when you sat down in the CFO seat, you mentioned that the prior CFO had moved on. What did you do? How did you go about understanding the F&A org that you had inherited and identifying your top priorities from the onset?
Yeah, no, that's a super question. So, like I mentioned previously, we had lost our CFO. There was limited staff. We had really, really good staff in place, but it was just very limited. And, myself having come out of some private equity backed roles as the chief financial officer and exits, I knew there was an expectation that the staff be capable of certain things as it pertains to running the business, and also when the time comes to transacting the business. And so you kind of, as you're planning an organization, you have to be thinking about both of those things, because if you run the business really well, but it's not equipped to, kind of support an exit transaction, well, then you've got this great business that's kind of illiquid and just doesn't work. And likewise, if you're simply focused on liquidating the business at some point in time, but you can't run the business, then you don't have anything to sell. So you got to be able to get both. And we had some gaps in both of those categories, certainly. And also the business in general wasn't where the investors wanted it. So there were a lot of kind of mandates that I had in place. It was to build a staff or to build a capability, I'll say, but then also to kind of right the business. It had kind of fallen sideways a little bit. It was still a great business, and patients were still being cared for wonderfully. The economics just weren't working for the people that owned the business, and so we had to kind of get things into better shape from a unit level economics perspective. So that was really what we were up to when I first joined. And obviously Consero is a part of, a solution that we ultimately brought in. But yeah, there were a lot of things to solve, and not necessarily a lot of things, that were currently in place when I got here.
Yes, that's great. And so in terms of order of operations, what, if you recall, was there a kind of a top several priorities that needed to happen first before you could get to, kind of get to where you needed to be?
Yeah, for sure. Here's how I approach things is, you know, and I'm sure like a lot of the guests on the line, you get a lot of calls, you talk to a lot of private equity folks or owners of businesses or board members, and they're all looking for the CFO to be the strategic partner to the CEO. That's what strategic partner, strategic partnering. All of this strategic partnering happens all the time. And the problem with strategic partnering is if you can't close the books, then you can't partner with everybody. So I'm fairly transparent in saying that my priority as the CFO has always been to make sure that we have the accounting and finance rigor that we need to support our business. So
Yep.
can we close the books in a timely fashion? Can we provide people with decision support? Can we have accounting processes that will withstand third-party rigor, an audit or a buyer doing due
Yeah.
diligence? And if the answer to either of those are no, well, then that's my priority. We won't be doing any strategic partnering. We'll only be doing accounting work, because that has to happen before we can figure out how to grow and scale the business. So that
Yeah.
was my first priority. There was a gap in that. So
Sure.
that was the first place that I looked to get things, kind of fixed up.
That's really interesting. That makes a ton of sense. So, as I recall, you were familiar with Consero from prior roles. As you mentioned, you were in several private equity-backed scenarios. So, what made Consero seem like an attractive option to you, and what were some of your concerns, working with a
Yep.
partner like Consero?
Yep. So the way that Consero came to MedFirst was via our private equity sponsor. So Greg Ostenkowski, who's with Severica, had gotten a call from somebody at Consero that said, "Hey, look, we have this great solution that's offering finance as a service. Would love for one of your portfolio companies to consider it." So it had already been teed up for me in a way. We had not yet made a decision. The CEO knew a little bit about Consero. The private equity guys knew a little bit about Consero, but we had to give it a kind of a full run through. So, so it was there. It was kind of in the background. I have never, up until using Consero, didn't have a lot of experience with outsourced professional services, I would call it. There's this thing, operating, kind of in the atmosphere out there, in that higher levels of thinking and complicated jobs are now being, kind of outsourced and offshored. And I wasn't familiar. I had always been to the school of, let's get a great FP&A function. Let's get an FP&A team together. Let's get a great corporate controller
Yeah,
together.
these other
Let's do
people, guys.
AP and AR. And make sure that everybody can, and we have a really good system there. And so, thinking about the Consero option, you then have to really, really think through, hey, there are certain benefits. Hey, I think that I'm going to get a cohesive team, but I was used to building these things piece by piece, and so that was probably the biggest concern for me is, hey, you know what? It's kind of an all or nothing proposition. Until I got comfortable with Consero, you're placing a lot of value in their hands, and you just have to feel really good that they've got all of these pieces that you typically love on each one by one, that they've got them. So that there was a little bit of a process to kind of get me comfortable and then to get our board comfortable. And I did not mention this, but we're not way different than typical Consero clients, but we do have on my staff a corporate controller, which isn't present in all of the Consero clients. I think some do, some don't. I said that, hey, look, I need somebody that wears a MedFirst badge in the accounting shop to help manage Consero, number one, but also to provide some of the things that I know have tricked up healthcare companies, such as simple kind of, they're not simple, but gross to net and AR and revenue recognition. So I felt as though I really wanted somebody in addition to Consero to help with some of those things.
That's great. And I guess following on that, what ultimately got you comfortable with Consero, and how important was kind of industry expertise there? Obviously, multi-location healthcare services have very unique needs. You mentioned unit economics. You want individual location economics and profitability. And so how are we able to get you comfortable,
Yep.
and how much did you dig in on that kind of sector focused expertise?
Yeah, so that was certainly a big piece of it. And Consero during the sales process was able to bring in the finance function different people that we could talk to about real challenges around third-party reimbursement and how in the world do you account for it. You know, I had been before coming to MedFirst, I was the chief financial officer of roughly a $1.5 billion specialty pharmacy where we're getting $7 million in cash every day. And so reconciling that and all of those transactions that go along with it is very complicated. But I was able to have conversations with Consero about just that. Like, what is your approach? How tactically do you do it? What are some of the specialists that you use to rely on to help you to organize these processes? So there was real depth there. That's really important. Now, again, it's not the end all be all, but because I was also going to hire a corporate controller who also had depth in that experience. But it's just one more player on the team that brings something. And I thought then, and I think now, that there was real depth there within healthcare that I found helpful, because it reduces the questions, it reduces some of the noise. There's still going to be communication that has to happen, but they come into the engagement with a working understanding of my business, which is super important. Just in terms of comfort, one of the things that I mentioned too, just in preparing for this interview, was I was impressed by, and this is going to sound kind of hokey, but by the sales process. Even the sales process at Consero was highly organized. So it wasn't just, tell me what you think you need and I'll go away for a little bit and come back. There was a detailed interviewing of understanding what we needed. And we had some points in our sales process where they said, hey, this is exactly what you've indicated you've needed. This is exactly what we're going to deliver. And I remember having a conversation with the corporate controller saying, hey, I don't see one of the board reports that the board likes to see. So there was an involved process to get that in scope.
Sure.
And I knew that if I was operating with a team that wasn't just like, oh yeah, we'll do anything that you want and it's all there, but yet one that had there was consternation about how do we produce this specific board exhibit. So it was then that I understood that, hey, there was a little something under the hood here where they actually take scoping very importantly. And they could understand what precise, not generally we needed, but they understood precisely what we needed during the sales process, which once I got that level, and we hadn't signed a single contract yet.
Yes.
But then I understood through that this is a sophisticated group that kind of, if you will, kind of operates with discipline, and that's where I started to get super comfortable.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for the plug for the sales team. That was not planted for the audience, but we'll take it. And so obviously any business, you sign a contract, there's a concern, is what you bought and what you were told in the sales process accurate once you get onboarded. So what did that onboarding process look like for you, Wes? Kind of your time commitment, was it, how'd that all go for you in MedFirst?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been through, so we actually had just moved from QuickBooks to Great Plains, and we had only been in Great Plains for about 8 months. And the Great Plains implementation wasn't good. We had shared with Consero all of this. And that piece wasn't very good. So what Consero actually had to do was they not only had to pick up the pieces from a bad Great Plains implementation, but they were going back to recording systems and gathering all that together. So they actually gave us in our onboarding, they properly did what we should have done in Great Plains, and then brought all of that information into Intacct. and into simple. So it was very complicated, and I was amazed. I've done 6 or 7 of these ERP, EHR, GL conversions for big and small businesses, and I mean, my view is they're always late. They always cost more. They never deliver on time, and because we were letting some staff go, or we wanted to keep them, but some of our staff ultimately did say, hey, look, I understand this isn't a long-term opportunity for me, and they left early. Consero actually had to pick up and do a month-end close early, and I was absolutely floored that it was done. I would have been impressed if they could have just delivered on time. They actually delivered the month-end close a month early, and it wasn't without issues, but they had enough of a process where they were able to pull it in and pull it in nicely. So I was to this day I stay, look, the next time I do this, I'm not going to assume that it's going to be done on time and on budget, but boy, I'll be able to say, hey, there was a time in my history where it actually did happen, and I was floored with it. I still sometimes am surprised in my head that it actually was able to be pulled together in the manner that it was.
Well, that's awesome to hear. I guess to take it another route in terms of interfacing with lenders, with bankers, I think you guys have raised some additional capital since
Sure.
we started working with you. How did Consero fare out in that process as a supporter, as a service for you guys?
So it's kind of interesting. I'll say so I joined in October of 2018, and at that time we had yet, let me get this straight, we had yet to finalize our 2016 audit. Okay, so our interactions with auditors weren't good. And then bringing Consero on, we did our 17 and 18 audits together about a year late, supported by Consero. And since then, we've now gotten, with Consero's support, we've now gotten our audits on track so that we completed our 2020 audit back in May, which for a business that did it 2+ years in arrears is like light speed. So I think that in and of itself, regardless of anything that I say or anything that Consero says, that should speak for itself. The fact that you took this business that couldn't really engage with third-party auditors and made the organization of the information so well and so well supported that it can get through an audit in 60 days. And we're not an enormous business. It's kind of on its way cresting to $40 million. It's not a tiny business, but it takes some lift to be able to do that. And so it put us in a great place with auditors. That puts us in a great place with bankers. And frankly, that puts us in a great place with equity investors. If your stuff is together and it's organized, and it doesn't mean that there aren't other parties that will take the Consero information and do other things with it. That's kind of what investment bankers do, and that's fine. But you have to have good bones there, and the bones are there. The support was there. Some of that, I knew when I joined wouldn't be able to get done with the team we had in place. At that time, I would not have known if Consero would have been successful, but they've certainly demonstrated with key processes. They've really realized what we brought them in to do, which was to excel during those types of processes. Excel during the lending process, excel during the audit process, excel in our interaction with the capital markets. Yeah, been very pleased with it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And then, with just more broadly with Consero's support, how has it afforded you to spend your time elsewhere? And then with that, what advice would you have to any company considering working with Consero, Wes?
Sure. From my perspective, when you can have a standard month-end close, and we typically close the books with Consero's support on or around the 12th business day. Frankly, it kind of waits for me to be able to do some of this stuff. But generally around the 12th business day, and when we can do that, we are able to that's orderly. There's a great process with the corporate controller. It all works fine. We then are able to, I can spend my time with HR, I can spend my time with ops and IT, and and then this business partnering with the CEO. I'm able to do all of that because I'm not trying to close the books. So that from my perspective has been worth gold. Paul Fennick, our CEO, really appreciates that.
Yes.
And the people that I'm able to spend time with appreciate it, because then I'm able to look, and I love accounting. I'm a CPA. It's what I do. But not, being able to afford time to be involved in the equity markets and the capital markets,
Sure.
makes me a better CFO, frankly.
Yes, that makes a ton of sense. And so what advice would you
Yeah.
have?
Yeah,
a
I'd say,
CFO calls you and says, hey, should
yeah.
I consider Consero? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for the experiences that I've had. So I would say, number one, my experience was good. So that's at least an N of 1. So that's fine. So individually, I've had a great experience. What do you want? What do you need? And how quickly do you need it? If our business was scaling, so we were acquiring practices, we were doing some other things. Maybe you have time to build a team, but if you either don't have time or you can feel comfortable with a finance as a service model, I would definitely consider it, because again, it's been freeing. Do you need to be free to do other things? If you can spend all of your time in the accounting shop, and that's all that's required, well, that's fine. Then maybe this isn't the solution for you. But if you need that handled, and handled well, and economically, we didn't do this as a huge trade up in expense. The costs that we pay now to Consero were roughly in line with what we're paying our US based staff, and we're getting so much more capability out of it. So it's, in a way, it's much cheaper than where we would have gone. So I would say, hey, what's important? But if you rapidly need something controlled, you need it controlled quickly, and you need to just know that it's being done well and that the business is being supported, then I would absolutely consider it, because my mandate was to do all of these other things, and you just couldn't do all these other things and give that the care and feeding that it needed without Consero's help. It just wasn't. There's not enough hours in the day to be able to do that.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for all of that feedback. I mean, that's all we had. We're up against the half hour. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Wes, at all?
No, I'm happy to. Nope. Just again, appreciate the opportunity with Consero. Glad that a good crowd showed up, if not for a drink, then for some time here. But really appreciate it. It's something that I'll strongly consider again. Absolutely. Because we in this market tend to turn over every once in a while. So when the business moves on hands, then I will probably move on too, and I'll be able to select Consero again. But appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy for you to share my information with people if they'd like to speak more. But thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. And with the business with the professional services component, we're only as good as the dialogue and feedback we get from our clients. And so, from what I gather from our team, that your team is extremely candid, and we only improve when we get the great feedback from kind of vested clients like you. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for spending the time with us today. And yeah, anybody follow up with us, and we're happy to put you in touch with Wes or answer any other questions that might have come up. But thanks for joining.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Bartley.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Bridget, for arranging.
You bet. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. All right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.